Hey, I'm James Arbert Lay, and welcome back to another episode of the Banking on Digital Growth podcast. Joining me today is my new co-host, Derek Krause, and today we're going to challenge old paradigms while exploring what it takes to break free and lead in a digital-first world. But before we jump in, if your website still feels like it was built back in 1999, I want you to know you're not alone. Even better news, my friends over at Metrify, they have a free 60-second website benchmark that shows you how your site compares to other banks and credit unions today. Text me right now. Text me 832-240-1922, and I'll help you get instant clarity on where loans and deposits might be slipping through the cracks and what you can do to fix these unseen gaps. Derek, let's party like it's 1999, but really bring the people who are watching and listening to this like it's 2025 and beyond today.
When I hear 1999, it makes me think of Amish Paradise from Weird Al.
Amish Paradise. Okay, here's the thing. You got Gangster's Paradise, which was Coolio, right? And then Weird Al came and he did Amish Paradise. I mean, what a crazy time looking back, because that's 25 years ago at this point. 26.
That is, yeah.
I'm doing the math correctly, and a lot has changed since then. Music has changed, the film industry has changed, the way we shop, the way we buy has changed. And for the context of today's conversation, obviously financial services has changed. But my question is, has it really changed?
Mm. For some, but not for others. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the way that I'm looking at this is you have two schools of thought. And those schools of thoughts are going to directly influence how a financial brand goes to market. You've got those that are shifting the model to a digital first mindset. But then you got others that are still playing like it's 1999, like the Prince song just won't go away, and playing the same track over and over again, expecting a different result. Like, no, it's still every New Year's when they play that song on New Year's Eve, it's the same track playing over and over and over again. But it's the pre-internet growth model. It's the pre-internet growth mindset. How is that showing up today?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm talking with financial institutions all the time, and it seems like they're still operating in a pre-internet era. And specifically what I mean by that is the way that credit unions and banks were born originally is when you go back, let's say 100 years ago, or even just pre-internet, when you thought of a bank or a credit union, what that meant was a building, physical building that you go to transact. If you want to do something with your money, you want to deposit a check, you want to open an account, you want to get a loan, you are going to this physical branch location. And then there's this massive innovation that came along called the internet. And
1994. Right?
Yeah. It's been a little while, right? But when I talk with financial institutions, they're still thinking of their organization as being primarily branch-based, physical-based. They're still building new branches when the game has changed.
They're building new branches, but they're failing to invest in, I think we'll look at this at a macro level, the digital experiences that will influence the perception, the beliefs, the behaviors of prospective account holders. I think Brett King framed this up very nicely when he said the idea, the verb of banking. He said, banking is no longer somewhere you go. It's just something that you do. And for a lot, banking is a chore. There are negative emotions attached to the verb of banking. It's painful. It's like, oh my gosh, I gotta deal with this stuff. but you're now seeing the rise of the fintechs and the neos and the digital banks taking a different approach that is more, I would say, human centric in the context of digital, but they're also thinking about what what I've heard leaders push back on as soft, touchy subjects that they're like, oh, well, the emotion that doesn't matter. Does the emotion matter? And perhaps we're failing to think about the member experience, the customer experience, the prospect experience because we're still operating like a branch first model even in 2025.
Mhm. I personally, I think it's really simple. Think about my own situation. I use Ally Bank for my personal finances. I chose Ally Bank a few years ago when I was 18. My dad said I was going off to college. My dad said, "Hey, just go to the Wells Fargo on campus, open an account." I okay, dad knows. I'm gonna do that. And so I had a Wells Fargo account for a long time. And then a few years ago, I was I was fed up with Wells Fargo because they're giving me an extremely low interest rate on my savings. And I wanted to do envelope budgeting for my personal finances. And it was going to be like 10, $15 or something for every account that I wanted. And I wanted a bunch of accounts. So I said, who can give me a way to do envelope budgeting and easily open accounts? Oh, and by the way, for me personally, I never want to have to visit a branch because that is an
Mm.
inconvenience to me. And so I was actually in search of bank or a credit union that would give me that experience where I explicitly said I do not want any branches because if they have branches, then I know they're going to use it as a crutch. And I don't want to have to go in for anything. I want all remote delivery because I'm busy and I want to be able to do everything from my phone or from home. That's why I chose Ally Bank. And I think for my generation and younger, it's just it's a convenience thing. Going to a branch is inconvenient.
Well, let me pause you on that because I'm glad you brought up my generation. I think it's important to set some context here as how old are you? And I use this in team alignment workshops. Typically within the first 5 minutes, I'm making everyone already feel very uncomfortable because I ask the question, is that how old are you today? But how old were you in 1994? Because how old someone was in 1994 is directly influencing how they're perceiving the world. Now, what's actually funny is in some of these workshops, there's a handful now that are timidly raising their hands saying, wait a minute, I wasn't around in 1994. Like I didn't exist yet. And I'm like, even better,
Yeah,
even
you
better.
get it even
So
more.
and that's why I wanted to pause because how and maybe the better question is how old were you in 1994? Because you're saying my generation, because I'm going to play devil's advocate. How much is you're saying, well, I did this and I choose this because of this, using your ally bank example. So it's like how much of the could there be a perceived bias influencing this, but then I'm going to loop back around once you provide everyone context of how old you were in 1994.
Yeah, I'm 36 now. I was born in 1989, so I was 5 years old in 1994.
5 years old. So in 1994, I was 13 years old. Um, So similar stage, but a little bit different. Like, I was in junior high, so I was already logging on the internet probably like in 92, 93,
Mm,
which was a wild experience back then.
yeah.
Uh, and I asked the question because I was speaking at a conference. I was doing a keynote, NAFQ, before NAFQ and CUNA merged to
Mm,
create America's Credit. And the night before, I was at the bar going through my keynote in the morning. I was not drinking. I don't drink, but I just can't sit in my room. I don't like being. I got to be around people. And there were two older gentlemen, very experienced, been drinking a little bit, and they have a great, interesting dialogue, great discussion, great discourse. And I said, "Do you mind if I join you in this conversation?" Well, yeah, absolutely. So I pulled up my chair. I was like, "You know what? I can finish this stuff later." I learned so much about them, about their experience, their life, and then I asked them, I was like, "Hey, I want you to go back. Think like it's 1999. What do you remember about the internet back then?" Because both of them, I think one was like 82, one was 85. They'd both been on their boards for probably 40 or 50 years. And I said, what do you remember about the internet in some of your board conversations?" And they're like, "Oh, it's just it's a fad, it's a trend, it's not gonna change anything. We're just gonna keep doing what we've always done." And I was like, well, and I was very empathetic. I was like, "So how'd that play out for you?" And they were like, "We couldn't have been more wrong. We couldn't have been more wrong." And I go, "Well, okay, fine. Flash forward, it's 2025. What do you think now about what's going on in the world of digital?" And they both, almost at the same exact time, they reached down to the bar and they picked up their mobile devices and they said, "This is how we do our banking today."
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, because you were, at a different stage back in 94 yourself, so you have a different context, a different perspective. Why do you think these institutions, these banks, these credit unions are still clinging to legacy mindsets? Yeah, that worked 20, 30, 40 years ago, but the mindset and the models are no longer applicable for today's digital first world.
Yeah, I think it's a few things. I think first, I think a lot of people see what's happening, but they haven't fully conceptualized they haven't fully realized exactly what's happening. They still know that there are people that want physical branches. So for instance, I asked my parents a little while ago, Mom and Dad, what would you think about using a bank or a credit union that had no physical locations? It was all just you've got the website, online banking, mobile app. You can call someone or video chat, but no physical locations. And they said, no way, no way would we do that. We have to have a physical branch. And so
Mm,
there are still there's still people that want that. And my parents' generation, and even older than them, they have more money than I do, and younger generations do. So a lot of credit unions and banks are still surviving by serving those customers that do want those physical branches. So I think that's part of it. And then I also think another big part of it is when people do see what's coming. I was just having a conversation with a client the other day about this very topic. And I was like, is your senior leadership team seeing what's going on? And
bingo.
and she said, yeah, but I think they're scared to really fully acknowledge it and face it head on because the transformation required, when you think about that, could be. I want to come back to this later because I think there is a solution for how to tackle it that isn't necessarily extremely painful, but it has the potential to be very painful to try
Mm,
to go through the transformation. I mean, because think about it, if if your CEO, leadership team member, board of directors at a credit union, and you realize, oh wow, we don't need physical branches anymore, and in fact, the younger generation doesn't want them. They want to interact with us remotely. What's the implication? The implication is we've got to shut down all of our branches. We've got to let go of all of our tellers and anyone else that is involved in the operation of those branches. We've got to hire tech people to deliver technology product and remote delivery. that's completely overhauling what the financial institution is, and that's so painful that I think uh, either virtually zero, very few institutions I think are going to do that successfully. I think there is another path, but I think those are the reasons why people are still financial institutions are still operating the way they are, is maybe not fully realizing they've got existing customers or members that still want what they have, and the thought of that major transformation is painful.
You know, that and I want to provide another perspective on this and look at it very objectively. I pulled up some data here as we've been talking. There was a report that came out in 2014 from Viacom. And at the time in 2014, the report said that 73% of millennials at that time, so 10, 11 years ago, 73% of millennials would be more excited about a financial offering from Google, Amazon, Apple, PayPal, or Square than from their own nationwide bank.
Hmm.
Now, keep in mind, context of time, 2014, 73% of millennials would be more excited about a new offering from GAFA, basically. Flash forward to 2023. So now 9 years after that came out, digital banks and fintechs, according to Cornerstone Advisors, captured 47% of all new checking accounts opened in the first half of 2023. And we know how the checking account plays such a big part in regards to acquisition, specifically when you think about like credit unions and community institutions of the relationship. But pretty much almost half were being acquired. New checking accounts were being acquired by the digitals and the neos of the
Yeah.
world. Now let's go 1 year later, 2024. Cornerstone Advisors, once again, community bank and credit unions combined only captured 9% of new accounts opened in 2024.
Oh,
I don't I'm looking at this very objectively with data. I'm removing emotion from this for the moment. But I do think emotion plays back into this when it comes to the consumer experience, the consumer journey, which we'll probably unpack that in future episodes. However, I'm going to give one more data point, and I want to get your take on what happens if nothing changes. Like, if nothing changes, nothing changes. What happens if the mindset of leaderships, and you were talking to a client yourself, like they might be aware, but they're not. It's like we're wanting to like sweep this under the rug. We don't want to address this, or we want the next generations of leaders to address it. Well, here's the thing: what if the next generation of leaders can't address it because there's no one around to address it to begin with in the first place? Because we're gone. 1994. 30,000 community institutions across the United States of America. 30,000. Flash forward 20 years later, 2014, when that Viacom study came out. What was going on at the time? That was kind of the early rise of social media adoption. So 2014 is the equivalent of what 1994 was with the internet. Well, 2014 was the same thing with the early adopters of social media.
mm,
Community institutions were cut in half from 30,000 to 15,000 community institutions in the United States. Let's flash forward 1 decade later, 10 years later, in 2023, 2024, that number, once again, connect the dots back to the cornerstone. 9% of new accounts are opened by community institutions, meaning, let me frame that away. 91% of accounts were not opened by community institutions. They were not opened by community banks. They were not opened by credit unions. But in 2024, that number, total number of community institutions in the United States is now less than 10,000. And we're at the start, we're at the rise of another inflection point. We had the internet in 1994, we had social media in 2014, and 2024, obviously, it's going to be AI. So, my question to you, Derek, is what happens? What are the consequences if leadership teams, if marketing teams stay stuck with a 1999 growth mindset?
they're dead.
Are they already dead? and they're just
They,
they already are they already dead? Are they already dead and they're just waiting to be buried?
if they don't do anything, yeah, yeah, it's a
Hey, it's JR. I want to thank you for listening to the Banking on Digital Growth podcast. If you're still using growth strategies from the 1990s, from 1999, chances are your website is partying like it's 1999. That's why my friends over at Metrify are committed to helping you identify where your website is creating friction and not conversion. So I want you to text me right now, 832-240-1922. Text me to get a free website benchmark. It takes about 60 seconds, and you're going to get customized recommendations that show you how you can stop losing loans and deposits. Let's get back to the conversation with Derek and I.
so a few years ago, I I read The Innovator's Dilemma. And I read that from the perspective thinking about credit unions and banks because that's who I've worked with over the last 10 years. And it was shocking to me how clearly it maps out the symptoms of an industry being disrupted and how well they map to what's going on with credit unions and banks. Uh, Credit unions and banks right now are in the middle of the innovator's dilemma. And the dilemma being that they have an old model that's worked for 100 years and they still have existing members and customers that want that old model, but a new model has arisen that is diametrically opposed to the old model. And in order to capture the rising generation of members and customers, they have to adopt that model. But so the dilemma is you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't be this thing and be the opposite thing at the same time. So you eat, which one do you choose? And I alluded to this earlier. I think there is an out, an alternative, but they're in that dilemma right now. And what happens so Clayton Christensen is the author of that book, The Innovator's Dilemma, and what he demonstrates in many industries across decades, when this disruption happens, if the incumbent, the organizations operating on the existing model, if they don't take the steps needed in order to survive, then they die. And that's what's happening.
It's super interesting when you talk about the innovator's dilemma and and drawing the parallels. I almost hear cognitive dissonance. It's like cognitive dissonance is like you're trying to, hold two opposing thoughts. It's extremely challenging, if not impossible, to hold two opposing thoughts in the mind.
Yeah.
But let's step out of the financial services industry just for a moment, because we can draw another illustration here of looking at other verticals. And I don't want to go down the tired route of the Kodaks of the world, or the Blockbusters. I just that's so tired and bored with it. It's freaking worn out. Tower Records. Let's look at the music industry.
Mm.
Tower Records. I think his name was Gus Solomon, if my memory is correct, the CEO of Tower Records. YouTube video. And I've done another podcast about this. He was lamenting the bankruptcy of Tower Records. And his admission was, and it's on film, it's on video, is we didn't listen to the kids.
Interesting.
We didn't listen to the kids. And if you think about Tower Records and what that brand was, it was built for the physical world. But if you think about what happened in 1994 with the internet, and specifically what happened in 1999, that was the year, and I'll admit this, I became a criminal. I was a song dealer, not a drug dealer. I had Napster, I had high-speed DSL before pretty much anyone else in my school did, and I had a CD burner. Watch out. Here's, I go to school, I've got, 20 songs for $10. What do you want? And then literally make the product and then bring it back to them at school the next day. Because at the time, CDs were like 18, $20, you know,
Yeah.
and Tower Records was fighting that entire shift of behavior because their whole business model was built for the physical world. Now, you
Right.
mentioned before, there's a path, there's a solution. What's the biggest mindset shift that needs to happen for financial brand leaders to break out, to go beyond of this 1999 mindset, to catch up to speed to 2025, to let's get to 2030 for that matter?
Mm. I think people have to accept first what's going on, because I think there's still resistance to the idea in the first place that that credit unions and banks are being uh, disrupted in a way that they can't just adopt the new technology and uh, you can't continue to invest millions of dollars in building and operating branches when fintech companies don't have that overhead, and so they're investing those millions of dollars into their remote service delivery. And
Yeah.
so I think it's a matter of first just fully accepting what's happening, because I think a lot of people they like mostly accept it, but then they're like, no, we still branches still matter. We I think that's the first key, is just to accept what's going on and be willing to face it head on rather than trying to skirt around it.
So I wanna play put an empathetic ear for those watching or listening, and they might agree with you, but then it's the chasm. The chasm is just too big to cross in their mind. And I know you mentioned before with the conversation that you were having with a client, like there's this acceptance or this resistance, and it's probably both at the same exact time. What if we just said, okay, well, what can we work with now? Like, where do we start to begin to modernize growth without trying to boil the ocean, without just trying to rip and replace, to make incremental progress when it comes to thinking about digital first growth, thinking about what I've written about in banking on digital growth, building a website that sells, because the website is probably one of the most influential, if not the most influential points in a buying journey, regardless of how someone applies. And I want to be very clear with that, because right now you can run ads and drive traffic to a website, but then from that point there are three paths. It's like the choose your own adventure books from the 80s and from the 90s. It's like, okay, well, you can apply online, you can call, or you could visit a branch, but that website experience, what someone sees, how it makes them feel, is going to directly influence the conversion point. So where can you start to make progress and create some momentum in this new direction here without just completely ripping and replacing the entire business model?
Yeah. And I want to talk about websites specifically because of what we're doing with Metrify. But before I go there, I'm going to back up just a little bit, like bigger picture. I think the bigger picture of what banks and credit unions have to do in order to survive. And again, in the innovator's dilemma, Clayton Christensen talks about organizations when facing disruption, what some have tried and some have done successfully, but it's extremely hard and extremely painful, is they transform the existing organization to adopt the new disruptive innovation. But
Mm,
as we talked about earlier, what that means is a ton of pain. Shut down all of your branches, develop a whole new product, set of products that are differentiated, basically overhaul your whole team with, if you can't contribute to uh, like technology products, then You don't have a place at the financial institution. You got to hire new people. That's extremely painful. That you could do that, but it would be really hard and really painful. The alternative that Christensen said that he's seen has been successful is, rather than trying to transform the existing organization, you let the existing organization continue to do what it's doing and operate on the model that it knows. And instead, you spin off a separate brand or a separate entity that is built on the disruptive innovation to begin with. So then, essentially, what that would look like for a financial institution is, imagine launching a separate brand that is digital only and that has differentiated products, not commodity products like they have today where they're just competing on rates, but something that's really differentiated in a meaningful way, at least one product that's different. So then you've got this digital only differentiated brand that can grow under that new model. And essentially what happens with disruption is, so now you've got these two entities. You've got the original one and you've got the new one. And basically, it starts off like this, where the new one is the bigger organization and the other one's just a small spinoff. But then over time, the old one declines and the other one increases, and eventually it becomes the main deal. It might even cannibalize the old one.
Mm.
So I think that's ultimately where financial institutions need to go in order to survive. And what we're doing with Metrify is built to help with that, because if you have a digital only brand, your website is essential, and you've got to be scientific about getting people to convert, and you've got to leverage AI today. But before any institution that decides they're going to do that, that's going to take them some time to get there, to develop that spinoff and to grow it. In the meantime, you've got to do the best with what you have today. You've got to be as competitive as you can be today. And to that end, if you don't have any relevancy in digital marketing, you're going to have a really hard time competing in today's world. And as you mentioned, websites specifically, in the world of digital marketing, the website is the most important asset that a financial institution has. And so starting today, treating that more like a science rather than just an art. Sure, there's an artistic creative component, but you've got to be measuring the right results, which is how many people are actually signing up for loans and accounts through your website. And it's really pretty amazing to me that like every credit union or bank that I talk with does not have the simple metrics in place to see, this is how many people are coming to our website. This is how many people are applying for loans and accounts. They don't know it. And that's a huge problem for today. And that's something you need to solve for the future and for today.
I want to roll back as we start to wrap up here, because your point about building these niche digital first brands, I remember, I want to say it could have been pre-COVID for that matter. I was doing a keynote at the CU Leadership Conference out in Las Vegas. And I had proposed this idea of what the credit union of the future could look like. And this would be true as well for a community bank.
Yeah.
And I put forth this idea of a portfolio of niche brands. Like, you have the corporate brand, and underneath the corporate brand, you have this portfolio of niche brands. Well, I would say I got a lot of interesting feedback after that session.
Yeah.
It was too progressive. It was too far out there. It wasn't practical enough. And I'll take it. I'll take the criticism. It doesn't hurt my feelings. It's just interesting now. Here we are, 5 years later or so, and I wrote about this and proposed this even in Banking on Digital Growth, in early 2020. But here we are, and as you were talking through that, I went through and looked up some institutions specifically. I would say 80% credit unions, and I do believe that there's one bank in this example. But uh, Gisa Credit Union, up in the Northwest, has launched a niche brand, Valor FI Heroes, and it is targeted to those in law enforcement and healthcare, first responders, those like the everyday hero. So they've built a brand and specific product messaging for that particular market segment. You've got MSCFCU, Michigan State Federal Credit Union, has done this with a couple of times now. They are building a portfolio of niche brands. So you got the corporate brand, MSCFCU, but then you've got Collegify. So those in college, which would then graduate to the Alumnify brand. And then now they've actually acquired a community bank and are building the Pillar brand around it for the SMB space. You've also got out of Oklahoma, Jill Castilla, Citizens Bank of Edmond. We've had a conversation on the podcast about this with her, launching Roger as a brand, specifically digital brand for the military vertical. And then you've also had a conversation with them as well from Vantage West. You've got Hustle that is targeting the creator space, the gig economy. But each one of these brands is uniquely positioned and communicates to the specific pains and problems while offering a cure, a prescription, a solution to the pains and problems for these niche verticals. So I wanted to take your idea and make it really practical for those watching and listening, saying, hey, this is something that's already happening. But to reinforce your point, if you're watching and listening, maybe you're not there yet. There's still work that you can do to optimize your digital experiences and specifically your website so that you can capture even more loans, even more deposits, which is where I'm going to wrap up here. If someone is watching, if they're listening, and they know deep down, Derek, they know deep down in their heart, because they're going to be honest with themselves and they're not going to lie to themselves, because all transformation starts by telling the truth. Lying's going to get you nowhere. Lying's going to keep you stuck. They're going to be honest. What's the one thing that they can do, knowing that they're stuck in the past, let go of that, and to start moving forward to create an even bigger future for themselves, for their team, for their financial brand? What can they do?
Yeah. The one thing that they should do today is they need to start measuring the right results that they're getting through their digital marketing, specifically through their website as their most important marketing asset. They've got to know how many people are signing up for loans and accounts. If you don't know that, you can't make any meaningful progress to increase the number of people that are coming in the door through that digital channel, which is pretty much everyone today, right? Very few people are going to be showing up to a physical branch to make an inquiry about opening a loan or account. Or if they do, they probably went to the website first anyway. They've got to know that.
I think about this idea of measuring. There's some wisdom. What gets measured gets improved. What gets measured and reported improves exponentially.
Mm.
So I really like your thought to wrap up. Very practical, very simple. And as we wrap up, if this episode has you thinking, has you rethinking about how you approach growth at your bank, at your credit union, back to your point, Derek, it does start with the website. So I want to invite you, you're watching or listening, text me right now, 415-579-3002. I'm going to show you, Derek's going to show you how easy it can be to benchmark your site so that you can move from this outdated assumption model, go beyond partying like it's 1999, to data-backed strategies. And I like how you frame this, Derek, the art and the science and the art. And as a result, you're not just going to survive 2025, you're going to thrive in 2025 and beyond. So, Derek, I appreciate the perspective you shared today, buddy. Thanks, dude.
Yeah, it's been fun.
As we start to wrap up, if today's episode has you rethinking about how to approach growth at your financial brand, it all starts with your website. So text me right now, 832-240-1922, and I'll show you how easy it is to benchmark your website with Metrify so that you can move from outdated assumptions like it's 1999 to data-backed strategies that will help you not just survive, but thrive in 2025 and beyond.